Hi there, and welcome to another interview. Today, I'm really excited because I've got one of my dream team on. I've been after Georgia Eads for ages and ages, and I'm so proud and pleased that she finally agreed to come onto the program. And it's partly my fault, by the way, because I'm so shy to approach these people that I think are wonderful. But anyway, Georgia, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate you coming on. And just for those people that don't know, you are not fanboys like me, could you just give us a little introduction about who you are and what you do?
Thank you so much, Coach Stephen, for inviting me on. I'm glad that you did. I'm really happy to be here. So I'm a psychiatrist. I've been practicing psychiatry for about 25 years. I'm based in Massachusetts in the United States. And I think the reason why I'm here is because I do psychiatry a little differently than a lot of other psychiatrists do. So for the first 10 years, I practiced the way most psychiatrists do, prescribing medicines and doing psychotherapy, talk therapy. And I still do some of that. I still value those ways of trying to help people. But after about 10 years of that, I started to shift gears and really focus more on nutrition, food, and the brain. And what I came to understand was that using nutrition and other lifestyle interventions as mental health therapies just much more powerful and much more effective and much more empowering than medications and therapy are for most people. So I'm really excited to be here because I think most people who have a mental health problem, if you think you've tried everything or, and nothing's worked or it hasn't worked very well, or if you are just not keen to try medications, it's never really been your thing, or you don't want to see, don't want to do psychotherapy or can't afford or can't access those strategies, I wrote this book to help you figure out how you can use food, your diet, changes in your diet to improve your mental health in ways that are usually make a big difference. And so that's why I put this book together, was to help people use diet to improve their mental health in ways they didn't. The key, I want people who are worried about their mental health to know that changing their diet can help them in ways that no medicine can, but they have to know which dietary changes are the right ones to make, and they're not the ones that they're usually used to.
Yeah, I can really echo that actually, because my specialism is diabetes and obesity, and the diets that some people come with, in their hands when they say, I'm really struggling. This is what the nurse has told me I should be eating for my diabetes, for instance. It's quite strange that it isn't correct very often. So let's just look at that phrase, mental health, because it's bandied about ever such a lot. What does that actually mean? How would firstly somebody recognize that they have a mental health issue? Because I'm assuming some people don't even know. And secondly, what's the first steps when you sort of do identify that maybe you've got an issue? So are there any clues, any things that people do that would sort of zone you in on, that person has a mental health issue and maybe they don't even know it?
Yeah, what a great question, because at least, here in the United States, the statistics say that 1 in 4 adults have a mental health disorder that's so severe that it interferes with their ability to function. And among young adults, 18 to 25, it's even more. It's rising, right? So it's 1 in 3. But those are just the people who are getting diagnosed. I mean, there are so many people out there. Most people are struggling with some sort of mental health issue, even if it's milder or sort of more common. They just may not expect much better of themselves. You know what I mean? So some people might struggle to get through the day and get enough work done. Some people might struggle in their relationships. They might feel irritable or edgy, or they don't bounce back easily from stress, or they feel easily overwhelmed. They can't sleep well. They kind of have a pessimistic view or sort of a worrywart way of looking at the world, always through a little bit of a cloudy lens, thinking, always kind of looking at the glass half empty, not having a lot of mental energy. So you kind of spent by the end of the day. And when you're at the end of the workday, you just have nothing left and you feel completely depleted and exhausted. And really just navigating the stresses of everyday life. Because all of us have stress in our life and some of it handle it better than others, but most people struggle. And so a lot of these things we think of as normal, right? We think, oh, it's normal to run out of mental energy by a certain time of the day, or it's normal to get to be easily irritated or easily overwhelmed, or just to worry about things like, to worry about things that haven't happened yet, or to worry about things that happened in the past that you can't do anything about anymore, to be really spending too much time thinking about those things instead of looking right in front of you at the people around you and the things that you have to do, and just managing that on a day-to-day basis in a way that feels good and productive, and that you feel good about yourself and you feel good about your relationships and your work, and you enjoy certain aspects of your life. I think a lot of people don't have all those pieces, and we should expect more. We should expect to feel better. It's just that we are led to believe that this is normal and that there isn't really much that we can do about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty clear, actually. And I think there's people out there, even myself, I listen. This isn't a pre-scripted conversation. And I can remember times when I was working 2 jobs and I was overwhelmed. I mean, I was in a situation where I went through a divorce, and which I wasn't expecting, with very unusual circumstances. Nothing particularly tragic, just completely out of the blue. And then, because you're not planning that, it really was out of the blue. I was completely overwhelmed. Now, I look back at that and don't think I had a mental health issue. I just felt I was struggling with finances or whatever. So when does it become sort of a normal occurrence to be overwhelmed, and when does it become problematic? When does it sort of trip over into, oh, wow, I have actually got an issue here with my health?
Yeah, I love that question too, Stephen, because in psychiatry school, psychiatry residency, we were taught that there was this very sharp line between a psychiatric diagnosis, say major depression or bipolar disorder or ADHD, attention deficit disorder, or OCD. But really, all of these conditions exist on a spectrum, right? So where psychiatry textbooks draw the line is they say there's this very sharp line between kind of having obsessive worry and having OCD. Let's take that as an example. So, if you check certain boxes really what it is, the way psychiatrists look at it is that to qualify for a psychiatric diagnosis, an official diagnosis of OCD, it has to interfere with your ability to function in some way, with work, school, home, your ability to function. So, but it's not as though you're functioning and then suddenly you stop functioning. This all exists on a spectrum. So some people, there are some, it's like a bell curve. So some people are way over here where everything's going well. They handle life easily. They breeze through. They feel good. They navigate their relationships and their work life very well. They're effective in their lives, and they're easily content, right? On the other end of the spectrum are people who can't function at all. They're incapacitated by symptoms of anxiety or depression, mood swings, difficulty concentrating, or memory issues. They're completely disabled by their symptoms. But most people fall somewhere in between. And what I like to help people do is just find their personal best. And I think that most people, because the information about nutrition that we've been given for so many decades has been incorrect, most people have been feeding their brains improperly for their whole lives. And so the brain isn't working as well as it could. And until you try a different way of eating, you won't know what your personal best actually is. So, regardless of where you are on this spectrum, you can move it this way, closer to closer to really fully functioning and really well and thriving, as opposed to just getting by. And so I think that that's everybody. One of the things I do in the book is I include a lot of questionnaires, links to questionnaires that people can use to assess their own mental health without even having to go to a mental health professional. You can score yourself on ADHD tests and OCD tests and depression tests and memory tests, so you can sort of see where figure out where you fit on this spectrum. But no matter where you are on the spectrum, even if you're way over here and you've had a lot of struggles and you've been in and out of the hospital, you may have even tried a lot of medications, I want you to know that there's so much hope in these dietary strategies. And I've shared stories in the book and studies in the book to show you this, that it really, no matter what your situation is, these strategies are worth knowing about and worth trying.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things I think bothers me is people don't believe there's a connection between the mind and the body. And we talk about health, if I couldn't move my arm like this, I would know that joint maybe has a problem. It's very easy to see. There's nothing abstract about it. I can't move that. And I would feel quite happy to go somewhere and say, look, I need to rehab my elbow. I can't move it. But with your mind, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, there's still a bit of a stigma for many people. They're very worried to say, look at me, I think I need a bit of help. I think, is that still the case?
It is getting a little bit better. The stigma issue, the shame around having a mental health issue is improving. I think partly because the newer generations, the younger people are more open about these things, and partly because of social media, people feel more comfortable sharing their stories. And a lot of people are realizing, hey, I guess I'm not alone in this. I guess most of us are struggling in some way. Now, why are so many of us struggling? I think it does have a lot to do with the deterioration in the quality of our diet and the incorrect information that we've been carrying around in our heads for so long about food. But to come back to your question about, oh my gosh.
The stigma.
Thank you. Thank you. So so we all have our little difficulties. Sometimes I get distracted by my own thoughts. So it's a stigma issue. So the thing about the brain is it's an organ like any other organ. So it's not your fault if your brain isn't working properly. It just needs some attention. You need to understand how to take better care of it. If your liver is malfunctioning, nobody's going to make fun of you, right? And nobody's going to ostracize you or say, we're not going to pick you for the basketball team, or we're not going to, include you in our music group, because when your liver's malfunctioning in most kinds of ways, it's not necessarily going to affect how you interact with other people, how you feel about yourself, how you speak, how you behave, how you think. And, it's when something goes wrong with the brain as an organ, it can really take a toll on your relationships with other people and with yourself. And so, this is why I think the brain is the most important organ to pay attention to when you're in self-care. And the good news is that the same principles apply to taking care of your brain, feeding your brain, as feeding your muscles, as feeding your heart, as feeding your bones. All your cells need the same diet. It would actually be very difficult if we were designed to eat a diet for each different organ that we had. A different diet for the brain, a different diet for the heart. So there's, for people out there who are feeling that they've been, bullied or teased or excluded for having a mental health issue. This is just keep in mind for yourself, regardless of what other people are saying or thinking or behaving around you. Remind yourself that the brain is an organ, like any other organ. It can malfunction, but it also can respond beautifully to the right dietary changes in most cases.
Yes, and I think that's one of the things that possibly the psychiatric profession has shot themselves in the foot with, because there's still people that just go, well, it's a chemical imbalance. Just you need to look at the serotonin or the dopamine. And I know there's a lot of scientists now at UCL have come out with research saying actually serotonin activity is nothing to do with it. And I know before we spoke, I didn't want to get into too much of the chemical side of things, but it is a big thing, because people are still having SSRIs and all this sort of stuff. And you're coming along and saying, well, actually, let's look at the root cause. Why is there an imbalance if there is an imbalance? And if it is an imbalance, how did that arrive? So I think there's a lot of muddied waters really from that sort of approach of it's a chemical imbalance, and maybe many people will be a bit skeptical. It's just food. By the way, I'm not. I'm just playing devil's advocate. So what are your views on the sort of chemical imbalance theory of mental health? And how can we get away from focusing too much on that?
Yeah, for really 75 years since the first useful psychiatric medications came along about 75 years ago, medicines like lithium, which is a mood stabilizer, and thorazine, the first antipsychotic. For 75 years, we've viewed mental health problems as these mysterious chemical imbalances in things like serotonin and dopamine, and that we were supposed to treat these chemical imbalances with medications. But this exciting new field of metabolic psychiatry views mental health problems as imbalances in energy that disrupt normal brain metabolism and the same neurotransmitter imbalances that we were just talking about. Because it's not that these chemical imbalances, it's not that they don't play any role at all in mental health problems. They do to greater or lesser extent, depending on what kind of condition you're struggling with. And medicine sometimes can help to a certain extent. The antipsychotics and the mood stabilizing medicines are the most effective medicines we have. They still fail most people, but they actually do help quite a few people. But they're not treating the root cause, right? So the chemical imbalances, it's not that they don't matter at all. It's that that's not the root of. So we have to ask, what's causing those chemical imbalances in the first place? And so a lot of it has to do with not feeding the brain all the nutrients that it needs. A lot of it has to do with inflammation in the brain, which you can't feel. The brain doesn't have any nerve endings, so you can't tell that it's inflamed. It's not that it gets, red or sore, but inflammation is silent in the brain. And this other thing called oxidative stress, which is why we're always told we're supposed to eat foods rich in antioxidants, is to fight oxidative stress. So these things that are going wrong inside the brain, inflammation, oxidative stress, and these energy imbalances, the energy imbalances are being caused largely by insulin resistance, this metabolic problem in the body that sometimes it's called prediabetes, sometimes it's called hyperinsulinemia or high insulin levels in the blood. When you've got these problems, when you have prediabetes, which now in the United States, it's more than half of us. I know that it's not quite as high in the UK, but you're catching up. If you have a blood sugar and blood insulin problem, you also will have a brain sugar and brain insulin problem. And it will become harder and harder over time for your brain to generate reliable energy around the clock. And when that happens, if you have an energy imbalance in the brain, all kinds of things can go wrong, because the brain requires a steady, reliable source of high-quality energy every minute of every day. And if it's not getting that, it's going to malfunction. And how it malfunctions is going to depend on who you are, like what your genes are and your family history and how you've lived your life to that point, and every lots of other details that are personal to you. But something will go wrong. And so it could be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be memory issues, it could be mood swings, it could be, you name it, right? So we now view we now view the root causes of mental health problems. The prime suspects are no longer these chemical imbalances. The prime suspects now are inflammation, oxidative stress, and the energy imbalances caused by insulin resistance.
I think this is such a fascinating subject. This book, by the way, Biochemistry, one of my favorite books. I don't know if it's in America, but this is where the 120 grams of carbohydrates per 24 hours is needed by the brain. This is where this came from, which is fine. And I often use the book and say, yes, but it never says dietary carbohydrates. It can be from gluconeogenesis, which is quite clear. But there is a little bit of uncertainty about the brain running on ketones. Is that possible? So I'm going to go back to real basics, if you don't mind, and just talk about how the brain works and ask a couple of really simple questions that I'd like to just nail. Can the brain run on ketones, or does it have to have some level of glucose?
So good. So the brain, as described by Professor Stephen Cunnane, who is an expert in brain metabolism and brain aging, describes the brain quite correctly as a hybrid engine. So it doesn't just run on one fuel. It's capable of running on a variety of different fuels, but its two favorite fuels are glucose and ketones. So glucose comes from blood sugar. The glucose in your blood, that's blood sugar, and the glucose crosses into the brain quite easily. So the higher your blood sugar, the higher your brain sugar. And so the glucose crosses into the brain, and brain cells can use glucose for fuel. All your brain cells can use glucose for fuel. All of the operations in your brain can use glucose for fuel. So a lot of scientists have mistakenly thought of glucose as the brain's favorite and ideal and best energy source for the brain. But that's actually not true. The brain runs best on a mixture of glucose and ketones. And the reason why it's better not to run your brain 100% on glucose is because, glucose burns a little bit. It doesn't burn as cleanly or efficiently. There's a lot more inflammation and oxidative stress involved in burning glucose molecules as compared to ketones. So sticking with glucose for just another moment, the brain cannot run on ketones alone. It can run on glucose alone, but when it does, it's going to cause a lot more inflammation and oxidative stress. Now, why would the brain prefer glucose if ketones run more cleanly and more efficiently and with less inflammation and oxidative stress? So there are pluses and minuses to both of these fuels. So one of the pluses of glucose is that it burns faster than ketones. So there are certain functions inside the brain that need glucose. You can't replace it with ketones. So for example, there are certain very fast, rapid firing cells, very highly active cells that need fast energy. Those cells need glucose. They work best when you feed them glucose. And there are these certain construction pathways inside cells that can only use glucose because ketones are the wrong size. So there are certain things you can't do if you're running 100% on ketones. So you do always need a certain amount of glucose. The brain needs access to some glucose at all times, but it actually does best if you're partly fueling the brain also with ketones. So the advantages that ketones have, like I said, cleaner, more efficient, less inflammation, less oxidative stress. But the other thing about ketones is that ketones, when you're in ketosis, your insulin levels are lower. You can't get into ketosis unless your insulin levels are lower. So when if you're burning glucose all the time, then all of your building and burning pathways inside the brain are going to be going full steam ahead. And that's kind of stressful on the brain. You kind of think of it as a factory, a big factory where you're, very busy factory. you want your workers to take breaks. You want you want to shut down some of those assembly lines, and so you can do maintenance and repair. And if your insulin and glucose levels are high all the time, your brain is just going to be going full steam ahead, and things are going to start to wear out. They're going to start to become damaged. They're going to need some attention. It's only when you are in ketosis, when you're generating some ketones from fat, and those ketones are crossing easily into the brain and fueling a lot of those operations and giving glucose a break, that you can do some maintenance and repair, some recycling and some healing. All of those pathways, the recovery pathways and the maintenance pathways, those can't run when you're full steam ahead with glucose and insulin. So it's really good to be in this state of where you're not all the way to the floor 24/7.
Yeah, and I think that's a brilliant answer. And I'm just going to stress for people that weren't paying attention, we're not talking dietary glucose. We're talking glucose in the blood, which can come from fats, substrates made into glucose by the liver. So it's not a case of, wow, I need 120 grams of glucose because my brain needs that over 24 hours. And I think that's where many people purposefully miss the word dietary when they're pushing certain types of diets. So that brings me on to the plant-based conundrum for me, because there seems to be a lot of people pushing that the plant-based is the best way to go for brain health. I find that difficult to believe when it's difficult to get all 9 essential amino acids from plants. And if you do manage to do that, you're eating ever such a lot of variety, and it seems like they're not even bioavailable. What's your view on plant-based advocates saying that that is the best for brain health when possibly it isn't? What's your view?
Yeah, so I have a whole chapter about this really controversial, really charged topic in the book. There's a chapter called The Plant-Based Brain that explains what the science actually says about so-called plant-based diets. And I really make an effort in the book to be clear about what kind of diets I'm talking about, because the word plant-based is very vague. It can mean lots of different things to different people. So I'm talking about vegan and vegetarian diets. So there's a world of difference, first of all, between a vegan and a vegetarian diet, because vegetarian diets do allow for animal foods, such as eggs and dairy, or what are allowed depending on what kind of vegetarian diet you like to follow. So you can build a very healthy and nutritious diet. You can eat a very healthy vegetarian diet if you're including, especially if you're including enough eggs, is my recommendation in the book. But constructing a nutritionally complete vegan diet is extremely difficult. You actually can't do it with whole foods alone. You need supplements, and often you need processed foods that have been fortified with nutrients, because if you're trying to, a whole foods vegan diet is nutritionally incomplete. And it's not just B12 isn't the only whole. There are several other nutrients quite important to the brain that are either very difficult to obtain enough from plants, or impossible to obtain enough from plants. And that's because only animal foods contain, especially meat, seafood, poultry, I would say, only meat, seafood, and poultry contain every nutrient we need in its proper form, in its human user-friendly form. We don't have to convert it, jump through any hoops to make it into what we need it to be, and without any anti-nutrients to interfere with our ability to absorb them and utilize them. So, and without any toxins, and without any defensive toxins that plants use to protect themselves. So there are numerous nutritional and health advantages to including some animal food in the diet. Vegan diets are inferior in many ways to omnivorous diets where you're eating a mixture of plants and animals. But how is it that we hear all the time that plant-based diets, so-called plant-based diets, vegan, vegetarian diets are healthier? I walk you through that reasoning. I walk you through that science in that chapter. But the short answer is there has there's not yet been an experiment in human beings where you take two equal diets, two whole foods diets, and all you do, and you remove the animal foods from one, and you keep the animal foods in the other one, and then you see what happens. All of the studies that people are maybe very well familiar with, heart disease reversal studies, for example, in the plant-based world, diet literature, diabetes treatments from plant-based diets, all of those studies, they change multiple other aspects of the diet. So they'll take out all the refined carbohydrates, all the junk food, all the vegetable oils. They'll often ask people to stop smoking, stop drinking, manage their stress, exercise. So there are multiple changes made, and then they compare that squeaky clean plant-based diet to a junky standard American diet that happens to have meat in it. And it's just not a fair fight. When those diets work better, which they often do, I mean, just about anything is better than the standard American diet. When those diets work in studies, how do you know it had anything to do with removing the animal foods? You've made so many other changes to the diet. It's impossible really to know. I mean, my money is on the fact that you cleaned up the diet and took all the junk out, especially the refined carbohydrates, because that always helps. But this question of, is a plant-based diet healthier than a diet that includes animal foods has never been properly tested in a clinical trial. And it wouldn't make sense that it would be better for us. When you look at the biology, our biology and the biology of plants and animals, it wouldn't make sense that it would be better. And maybe that's why people haven't dared to test it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I'm keen to ask you is what are the challenges you're facing when you're trying to get all these individual dietary approaches out to like a broader audience, which is, why I wanted to speak to you, because I think it's really handy to get people in the UK looking at this. But there must be obstacles in your way, I would imagine, and colleagues being skeptical. What are you finding with this information you're putting out there?
Well, you mean in terms of plant-based diets in particular?
Well, the whole thing, actually, the whole concept of eating to improve mental health, actually.
It's been a real mixture of responses. So everything from excitement and enthusiasm and hope and curiosity to real skepticism, fear, worry, criticism. And so, I mean, really, I guess that's the human experience, right? So everybody's got their different take on it. For us in psychiatry, we've really run out of ways to help people. And, most, I think anybody who's watching your podcast who has ever been through mental health treatment of any kind, gone to a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a therapist, been to group therapy or been in the hospital, most of those people can tell you the ways that we treat mental health conditions really leaves a lot to be desired. And most people do not get that much better. Most people are frustrated going through trial and error approaches of medication after medication. Let's see if this one works. Let's see if this one works. Let's see if this one works. We're really practicing in the dark. We don't have tests that can help us figure out which medicine is the right one that I should try first. I wish we had that. We don't. So we don't have any reliable way of measuring your brain chemistry. So we really are guessing when we're trying to help you with medications. We need new treatment approaches, and we need root cause treatment approaches. So psychiatrists who recognize that their practices are filling up with people who aren't getting better, many of them are hungry for new solutions and new approaches. They just don't have the information that they need to be able to put these into practice, which is why I started a training program in this topic. But then there are, I think, the majority, I would say, of psychiatrists who are skeptical and wary of these approaches because they haven't learned about them. They don't know yet what's possible with these approaches. We haven't had these very rigorous, large, what are called randomized controlled clinical trials, these very rigorous clinical studies, experiments in human beings to show, well, if you put somebody on a whole foods ketogenic diet, if you put 200 people with depression on a whole foods ketogenic diet, what % of them are going to get better? That's the kind of evidence that they're used to looking for. And those trials are being conducted, but we don't have the data yet. But what I like to say is we've got more than 100 years of science backing up. We know plenty about nutrition to give you good information about nutrition. And we have over 100 years of science on the ketogenic diet in terms of stabilizing brain chemistry, because we know that it's been very successful treatment for epilepsy, which is a chemical imbalance in the brain. Brain chemistry is unstable in the brain. So if the diet can stop seizures in its tracks in, so many people, couldn't it also stabilize brain chemistry in people who are struggling with emotional issues? So there's a lot of hope among some people and excitement, and a lot of skepticism and fear, because it's such a new field without the types of evidence that very cautious physicians are looking for. But among patients, there's a lot of excitement. And so people are just hungry for new approaches. So many people don't want to take medication, can't afford medication, don't respond well enough to medication or at all to medication, or get a lot of side effects from medication, so they don't tolerate it well. And so can't access medication. And so there's a lot of people who could have access. I mean, these kinds of strategies, anybody can change their diet. Anybody can. And just about every psychiatric condition will improve to some extent if you feed the brain better. The brain will get healthier. And then, of course, how can that not help you in some way? So I think that this is a really exciting time to be a psychiatrist, but because the field has been kind of stagnant for 75 years, but it's also a really exciting time to be a patient, to be somebody who has lost hope or doesn't like the idea of going to a therapist or taking a prescription medication. They're empowering strategies. These are not, oh, let's just nibble around the edges of your diet, or let's just sprinkle some superfoods on top. That's what we're usually told works. The Mediterranean diet essentially just nibbles around the edges of the standard American diet. It just takes a few of the not so good things out, but it leaves a lot of the not so good things in. You can do so much better than that. So this is not a superfoods and supplements and Mediterranean diet strategy. This is a root cause. This is a fundamental restructuring of your diet from the ground up that fundamentally changes your brain chemistry. It's a really powerful biochemical intervention. And so if you want real, noticeable, meaningful change in your mental health, you have to make real, meaningful change to your diet as well.
Yes, I can't echo that enough. One of the things I really want to tell you is I do a lot of success stories, and it's littered with people that are off their antidepressants, their anxiety is much less, they're sleeping better, which is often underestimated as a big problem. And they've done it with diet, and they've done it actually, in hand with the healthcare professionals as they've got off the medications, doing it all sensibly, correctly. But that's a lot of people. I mean, I've been doing rehab for about 15 years, low carb 10 and carnivore for 5, and have over 1,000 reviews, of which I would say 10 to 15% of those people had mental health issues, which they clearly have covered, regressed. Incredible amounts of success. So I think that's one of the things I would say is, yes, there's not clinical trials, but there is a lot of anecdotes, and I know they're all N equals 1, but that's a lot of people, and that is data. To me, I love doing the success stories because I'm in awe of what people have done and how they have navigated all the obstacles, really, because many people have said to me, I was depressive, I was suicidal, I was losing my marriage. Once I changed the way I was eating, all of those, it saved their life. I've heard that phrase 10, 15 times in the last 5 years where they've said it actually saved my life. And it's diet. It is diet. Now, whether it's me putting the horse before the cart or the cart before the horse, did they have some switch that made them think, I can now control this, and therefore they went on a good diet? Or was it the diet that made the switch, if you see what I mean? It doesn't matter to me. They arrived at the end point that they wanted to be, which was off their medications, having, 2 days ago, someone said, I've got a normal brain now. They actually said that. And it was just diet. I always say no, it's you as well. It's you've made changes. You've done stuff. It isn't that, you've eaten ribeye and it's magic. It's not a magic wand. You've changed, but it's helped you to change. It's given your brain the environment to be able to be fueled correctly, to, like you say, reduce the inflammation, the localized inflammation going down. I think it's very interesting because they'll say, not only do I feel better, but all my joints don't hurt anymore. There's no aches and pains. So it does, to me, seem quite convincing. And I think it's frustrating that you do find some obstacles, but I wouldn't pin my hat on clinical trials. I would just think just a groundswell of people reading your book and changing their diet, and just more and more anecdotal, successes. I think that's the way it's going to work. Personally, I think it's going to be from the ground up, because I believe carnivore. I mean, I get a lot of lovely comments. About 98% of my comments are great, but 2% are really vicious and horrible and negative, which is great for engagement. It gets me up the algorithm, so I'm fine with that. I do feel that there is certainly a groundswell in the UK for more people to try carnivore and actually saying, well, my family were against it and now they're for it. I was just going to ask you to wrap up, because I don't want to, impede on your time too much. Do you have any personal anecdotes or personal experience or case studies or people that have come to you and said, look, I watched you on YouTube and this has happened?
Well, a few things I want to say in response to what you just shared, because first of all, congratulations on having so much success with the way that you work with people. Because I know that you don't just do nutrition, you also work with muscle health, right? And so you improve muscle health. And this is a really important pillar of metabolic health. So just as you can't outrun a bad diet, you can't out diet poor muscular health. I mean, you need both of these things to be optimally healthy, right? You need both of these things. But the other thing I want to say is about the N=1 and the anecdote, because a lot of people say, oh, that's just one person, right? Or, oh, this is an N=1. That doesn't mean anything. Well, if you're the N=1 that it happened to, it means everything. It doesn't matter if nobody else gets better. If you're the one that got better, success. I mean, then you can celebrate that. If the diet only helps 1% of people, which I guarantee you it helps many more than 1%, but if it only helps 1% of people, good for those 1%. I mean, you really have nothing to lose by trying these strategies and see if they work for you. Because even if a very rigorous study comes out and says that 90% of people respond, 90% of people with, bipolar disorder, or 90% of people with suicidal thinking, or 90% of people with OCD or PTSD. If the diet helps 90% of people and you're one of the 10%, how useful is that study to you? It's not useful. The only experiment that matters is your experiment. So, and this is the beauty of this strategy, is that we need very rigorous studies to make sure medications aren't too dangerous. We don't need rigorous studies to tell us that eating a whole foods, lower sugar, lower insulin diet is a good thing for a human being. That's a no-brainer. So this is not a scary intervention that needs to be put to the test. This is a very, very safe. One of the things I want to point out is that if you're starting a carnivore or ketogenic diet, any kind of a low carbohydrate diet, it's really important to consult with a professional first, because you may be taking medications, or you may have a medical history or a mental health history that can put you, that can cause you to feel worse before you feel better as you're transitioning to the diet, and can even be dangerous in some cases in combination with certain medications or certain histories. So, and the reason why professional support is so important when you're going on a low carbohydrate diet is because it's a powerful intervention. So other types of diets don't need this kind of medical supervision because they're just, like I said, kind of nibbling around the edges of a bad diet or sprinkling something on top. This is a very powerful intervention. So now I also want to make clear that not everybody needs to eat a ketogenic diet. Not everybody wants to eat a ketogenic diet. So there are 3 diets in the book for you to explore. So there's a whole foods paleo diet that's about 90 grams of carbohydrate a day. There's a ketogenic whole foods diet, and there's a carnivore diet. So and then there's even a list of single changes you can make to your current diet if you want to take a one at a time approach, rather than if you don't want to restructure your diet from the ground up, if that feels like too much to you and you just want to change one thing at a time. There's a list of the changes that are most worth making, and you can just pick one of those, start wherever you feel ready, and then decide if you want to take another step. So I really have made this book, I've tried to make this book as useful as possible to as many people, regardless of your dietary preferences. I've given information about how to make vegan and vegetarian diets brain healthier. I think that there's meal plans and recipes, everything you need. So I've tried to put as much practical information in the book as I could, while also including enough science so that you can reassure yourself and your healthcare providers that it's not dangerous. So, I, in terms of stories and anecdotes, you're asking me, so I'm coming back around to your original question. I opened the book with a carnivore story, a carnivore mental health story. The reason why I opened the book with that is because it's a very provocative story. And it's the kind of story that makes you want to ask questions. This was the story of a man. His name is Carl, and he's allows me to use his name. He allows me to use his photograph in presentations. He's been very, very kind and generous. Very physically fit guy, cycles 100 miles or more per week, in his 60s. So very physically fit. Started a carnivore diet because for decades and decades of anxiety, depression, that medications just made it worse. And so exercise helped him, but it didn't help enough. And so he started a carnivore diet, and within a few weeks, every symptom of anxiety and depression was completely gone. And there's more detail about that story in the book if you're curious, but what does that mean? So what does that mean? First of all, an all-meat diet, that's supposed to be bad for you. So how could that be good for you? How is does this mean that there's some aspect of our modern standard diet that is causing mental health problems? I mean, how much of our current mental health crisis could be reversed or prevented entirely if we ate a different way? We don't know the answer to that question, but stories like this beg that question. Okay, well, if you flip your diet upside down from what we're told to eat, I mean, if you go from plant-based to animal-based and all of your symptoms disappear, what does that mean about diet? What does that mean about mental health? What does that mean? What is anxiety? What is depression? Are these just largely reactions to a bad diet? What does it mean? And so that's the reason I start the book with that story, is because it is a very striking and very provocative story.
Brilliant. Thank you. So I very rarely do this, but I'm just talking now to everybody that's listening, whether you're on the audio podcast or on the video of YouTube or other platforms. if you do get the book, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind, and you go through all the different questionnaires and you find something that you feel needs action and you pick one of the diets, can you please drop a comment and actually tell us what the outcome was? Because I'm trying to get as many people to actually do this sort of thing. And I love the N=1. That's the first time I've ever heard anybody say so explicitly, forget the rest, you are important. And that's what I want to say. You are important. Just forget the noise that's outside all of this and all the controversy about different types of diets. Read the book, decide what you need to do. You might read the book and you might think, actually, I've read the book and now I feel totally fine. Then drop that comment too.
Yes.
So I think that's my key takeaway is that it's in your own hands and you can read up and you can do your own research and you can try something. You can do something practical and give us some feedback. Whether good or bad. I mean, I think that's the way ahead, isn't it? If someone tries, I don't know, paleo, your version of paleo, and it doesn't work for them, then that's good feedback, isn't it? And it could be that there's something in that way of eating that is problematic for you as an individual. And this is why, I arrived at carnivore, because the more I eliminated stuff out of my diet, which I was really surprised was causing me a problem in hindsight, because I didn't think it was only the removal of certain foods that made me think, wow, all my life I've eaten that. And I didn't know it was causing me a slight problem. So I think that's it. Be open. Don't go in with I'm never going to give up X food, because you just don't know until you try something. So I think that's been a brilliant hour. I really appreciate your time. Is there any final thoughts you want to end on?
I have really appreciated the time too. I really appreciate that you're asking the questions that people are most needing answers to. And I hope that this information is new to a lot of your viewers. I want to leave with a couple of thoughts. So one is, if you are looking for somebody to help you with a low carbohydrate or ketogenic or carnivore diet, you need a clinician to work with you. I have a free clinician directory on my website where it's an international directory, different types of practitioners who are skilled in guiding you through these dietary interventions. So please feel free to search. It's completely free to search that directory. And so that's one thing I wanted to make sure people knew about. But what I really want to say is, if you're out there and you lost hope about your own mental health, or you've never really thought about the connection between food and mental health before, I want you to know that it's a very powerful tool, and that there are lots of different changes you can make that could make a very big difference to your mental health. And we're not talking, a year or two. We're talking days to weeks in most cases of noticeable improvement. I like to use the kind of 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months rule. So most people it's within 3 weeks, but some people are as lucky as 3 days, and other people have to wait about 3 months or so. But you deserve that. I mean, you deserve to experience what it feels like to feed your brain properly. And like you were saying, Coach Stephen, do your own experiments. Be curious. Try things and try these on for size and see what works best for you. The book is designed to help you troubleshoot and tweak and personalize the diet so that you find the diet that brings you the best mental health, the broadest diet that you can comfortably enjoy. That's the goal. Not everyone needs keto. Not everyone needs carnivore. But so please, engage your curiosity, and just for a few weeks or a couple of months, give it a try and see what's possible for you. You won't know unless you try.
Thank you so much for listening to my podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Your support means the absolute world to me. And if you're enjoying this show, I've got a small favour to ask you. I'd be incredibly grateful if you would consider becoming a supporter and make a small monthly donation. Your contribution will really help to improve the show. I'll be able to improve the software, maybe put a few more episodes out, and do many things that I'm hoping to do in the future. Do them a lot quicker. So, it's a small monthly contribution. You can cancel at any time, and the link is in the show notes. Thanks very much for listening.